Please be seated. So in 2009, we had this really crazy idea that we would pick 4 or 5 leaders to lead out in groups who would go out into the community and serve and minister, and it turned out to be one of the really coolest, most cool, rightly cool things we've ever done. Groovy. It was groovy, yes. And so we saw a lot of ministry take place, a lot of cool things happen, a lot of ideas that we would have never come up with as a staff. And so we've taken a 4-year break. We kind of felt some of the momentum leaving from it, so we figured we'd give it some time off before we brought it back. And so we're going to bring it back this year. So for those of you who are new and haven't been around for Operation Neighbor, this is where it comes from. It comes from the story that Jesus told about the Good Samaritan. So we're going to work through that passage a little bit today and kind of get some clarity on what we're talking about, and then we'll get started with Operation Neighbor as we finish up. So we're in Luke chapter 10, and we'll go through the first part of it as we read it. And so Jesus, as often, was being challenged by someone. And so Luke chapter 10, page 1040, I guess that's good for tax time. Luke's, few people got that. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Luke 10, verse 25, page 1040. And it starts off, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Now, there's a lot of debate about who this expert in the law is, but it seems a pretty common consensus that this was probably a lawyer. All right, and so notes say insert lawyer joke here, but I won't do that. All right, so this was a lawyer, someone who was an expert in the law who would defend people in civil cases and court cases. And so he wanted to test Jesus. All right, wanted to see how smart Jesus was. He heard good things, I guess. So he tested him. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus, as so many times, responds with a question. As good teachers will do. What is written in the law? He replied. How do you read it? In other words, you're an expert in the law. You tell me what you see. Verse 27, the lawyer answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So what he did is he really kind of quoted Jesus. Jesus had been teaching this, that if you want to sum up the whole law, you can sum it up in these 2 commandments. The Shema, which is love the Lord your God with everything you have, and love other people as you love yourself. That was a constant theme of what Jesus taught. And so whether he came up with it on his own or he knew Jesus had been teaching it, he came to the same conclusion that Jesus did. Love God and love people, and you've got it. So verse 28, Jesus said, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. Now the story could have stopped right there, right? It could have been done, but the lawyer wanted to justify himself in verse 29. So I really struggle with how was he justifying himself? What was going on? So what I came up with, and the scripture doesn't tell us this, so I'm making this up, but I'm trying to think of how you would justify yourself with this question. All right, who's my neighbor? So my thought is maybe they were in a smaller community and this guy had done something very generous for someone else. And everybody in the community knew it. And he was to say, you know what, I've impressed the teacher so far, and everybody thinks I'm really smart here in the group. So now I'm really going to make them be impressed with me because I'm going to point out the fact of how good I've been, and the teacher's going to tell everybody how wonderful I am by acknowledging the fact that I took care of Jim Bob's house or whatever I did down the street. So who's my neighbor? He said, trying to justify himself. The problem, of course, is he was talking to Jesus. All right? And Jesus is kind of big on motives and kind of big on why we do what we do and the purposes that are behind it. So Jesus responds with a story. And thus we get to the parable, which is a story with a meaning. We get to the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, there are 4 people in this story. The first is a man who was on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's a 17-mile trip. It's a trip that has places where you can hide. It was not uncommon for people to be robbed on that road. Didn't happen all the time, but it was not uncommon. People knew that that would happen. And so when Jesus shared that story, it was something that, oh, yeah, I read about that in the paper. All right, so he was on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho. The second person in the story is a priest. Now, the priest is someone who either oversees the worship at the temple or in one of the synagogues. Okay, so this is like pretty high up, a descendant of Aaron, somebody who would have been in charge of worship, bringing people into the presence of God. All right? The third person is a Levite. A Levite was a priest assistant, as it were. The Levites were held in high esteem amongst the people. They would make sure the temple was in order, make sure the synagogue was in order, make sure the priest had everything that they had to lead worship, and they were called on to be carriers of truth and upholding everything that happened in the temple. The fourth person is a Samaritan. A Samaritan is an outcast. A Samaritan is somebody that no Jewish person would like. A Samaritan was a half-breed. Remember, we've been going through Malachi, and we talked about how the men would intermarry with Canaanite women. Well, that created the Samaritans. And it was there that the Samaritans, they were so outcast and so despised and so disliked that they had their own little country that Jewish people wouldn't even walk through. They'd have nothing to do with them. I tried to figure out how we can compare it to somebody today, and the only thing that I can really come up with that's even close is Democrats and Republicans. Right? So you have an extreme Republican and an extreme Democrat, and you put them in a room and you ask them a political question. What's going to happen? They're going to argue, right? They're going to get after each other, and before the other one even opens their mouth, they're going to assume the other one's wrong. Right? That's just how it works. All right? So if you don't believe that, you can just watch it on TV. Turn on a news station today and you'll see that happen. And you see them go back and forth. So the idea is, and what I'm trying to tell you is, when you live on the extremes, that nothing the other person says is ever going to be right. And that's how the Jews looked at the Samaritans. They are unclean, nothing they do is right, and the idea of labeling this passage the Good Samaritan was an oxymoron for a Jew. There's no such thing as a good Samaritan. Just like for an extreme Republican, there's no such thing as a good Democrat, and for an extreme Democrat, there's no such thing as a good Republican, right? So a Good Samaritan was not something you would ever heard a Jewish person say. And so, in fact, Jesus didn't say Good Samaritan. We put that title on it later. All right, so he tells the story. These are the four people. And so in verse 30, in reply, Jesus said, a man going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, when he was attacked by robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wound, pouring on oil and wine, and he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Jesus turns to the teacher of the law and says, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Notice he couldn't say the Samaritan. The one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. There are a couple of things in this story that I think are very relevant for us and very relevant today. And the first one is this. I think Jesus was trying to teach the people, first of all, it is impossible to love God with everything about you and not love people. It's impossible. You can't love God with everything that you have and know everything that there is to know about God and not love people and have compassion for them. So he uses the priest and the Levite as an illustration, and he uses them because they're going to know all about the law. They're going to know all of the rules. They're going to know everything that's right. They're going to do what is right because they are experts in the law themselves, and so they are going to please God and understand how God expects them to live. And Jesus having trouble with those kinds of people throughout his ministry is saying, listen, it doesn't matter how much you know about God. It matters whether or not you know God. And there's a difference. Because when you know God and you really love him with everything you have, you're going to have compassion for people that are hurting. You just can't help it. Now, Jesus doesn't tell us why they didn't stop. You know, we can guess that maybe they were in a real hurry to get to the synagogue or the temple, and they were so busy doing God's work that they didn't have time to stop. Or maybe they saw the blood. They said, oh my goodness, if I touch the blood, I'll be unclean and I won't be able to do God's work. Or maybe they thought he was dead. I touch a dead body, that's even worse. That's even longer unclean. I have to go through the process of becoming clean so that I can do God's work again. So I can't stop and help because I have God's work to do. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? See, I think we have to be real careful. Sometimes we have a tendency to get so hooked on our theology and so hooked on our knowledge that we forget that all of this is about a relationship with God first and foremost. It's good to know what you believe. It's good to know why you believe it. Don't hear me say that that's not true. But when our belief system keeps us from being compassionate towards people, our belief system is wrong. And I think that was Jesus' point. Yesterday we had the feeding and where we gave food away, and it was really cool. It was probably the best we've had. Everything went so smoothly and so nice. And so when that happens, I'm free to walk through the line and meet people. And talk to people. I've met many of them before, pray with them and ask how I can help them and those sorts of things. And right before I was starting to do that, it dawned on me, there's a flu epidemic going on. People are dying out there from the flu. I thought, I really don't want to shake all of these hands. I mean, I'm thinking, and so I thought, so I prayed, and I looked, and I went and I looked at the people, and I said, I've got to go. I've got to go through the line. And so the second person I shook their hand, I said, I just got over the flu right as they shook my hand. My wife still has it. Please pray for her. We'll do it. So I go through the line, but as I went through the line, and I'm not holy or wonderful or anything, but it was, there's stories of Jesus when he's trying to get away and get alone, but he sees the crowd and he's overcome with compassion. And he can't stay away from the crowd. And that's kind of what I felt yesterday. I can't stay away. And ended up having incredible talks with people that were going through all kinds of different things. And God was very present in those. And it was obviously what I was supposed to do. But what I'm saying is sometimes we get so caught up in fear of people, so caught up in whatever it is, even get caught up in doing God's work, where helping people with food is a great thing and be a godly thing, and to volunteer and be a part of that instead of meeting the people, I could have justified that easily. But I did what I was supposed to do. And I think Jesus is telling the people, look, the Levite and the priest, they have all the answers, but all the answers mean nothing if you don't impact people with it. So then Jesus, for whatever reason, uses a Samaritan in the story. And the Samaritan, that is just so incredible, because for his Jewish audience, this would have been why would he do that? But this Samaritan went out of his way to help the person in need. And I think the message of Jesus from the Samaritan is this: describing a neighbor. Your neighbor is not the person that you love. And it's not just the person that loves you. Your neighbor is the person who needs you. Do you understand the difference? Your neighbor is the person who needs you. Your neighbor is the one who has a need. And they may not be bleeding on the side of the road, but they could be hurting just as bad on the inside. Your neighbor is the one who needs you. Your neighbor is the one who needs you to step in. Your neighbor is the one who will stop And as Jesus said, he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to the inn, took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "It's sacrificially, here, I'll give you more. Just let me know when I come back. I want to help, because this guy needs me. He needs me." Operation Neighbor started out as an idea to help lay people, congregation, go outside the walls without permission from me. To help people see you don't need me to do ministry. You can do it without me. It's amazing. God can use you even if I'm not there. And that's how it started. And I think we've taught that for so long, and we've made that a priority. I think we get that. But one of the things that we have to realize is here in Murray Hill, we live in an amazingly diverse community. All right, and that is true somewhat ethnically, but it's definitely true socioeconomically. It's definitely true politically. It's definitely true in lifestyles. And it's just about anything you can name. We have an amazing diversity here. And if you don't believe me, just drive around and look at the murals. Okay? If you haven't done the murals, you need to go around and you need to see them. Now, here's when I go see them. Now, I am not a high creative, so some of the murals make absolutely no sense to me. All right? I'm just going to tell you, and I'm not condemning them, but there's one I literally have sat for 10 minutes in front of looking at it, trying to figure out what they're saying. All right? And if you can understand lasso and explain it to me, please do, because I don't get it. All right? So, again, I'm not condemning it. I just don't understand. And there's other ones that are just absolutely gorgeous. It's like, wow. But what's so funny and why I bring that up is because you can be in conversations with people in the community, and they all hate and like different murals. Right? Some of the ones hate the ones I love and love the ones I hate. And some of the ones love the ones I love and hate the ones I hate. But then there's all kinds of mixture. And so there's all kinds of different personalities and ideas and all of these murals and represent all kinds of different people. But I think it's just a microcosm of what's going on here. And so all of that to say is we live in such a diverse setting that this setting is in desperate need of seeing the love of Jesus. And if we contain the love of Jesus inside these walls, we're making a big mistake, right? And so we need to take it outside these walls. And so that's what Operation Neighbor is about, is that we go and we love a community, whether they're like us or not. We share Christ's love with them. And like the Good Samaritan, we bring love even when it doesn't make sense.